Okay, hi. Welcome to the third lesson, going through the attachment topic, carrying on from there. Today we are looking at the Romanian orphanage studies which happened. So we have the Bucharest study, which is a really important study, and we also have the ERA study, the English Romanian adoption study, okay, of whom Michael Rutter is someone we've heard of a bit before in our previous session. So we're going to try and look at the effects of a thing called institutionalization. Now this will come up both within this topic and within schizophrenia and within forensics. It's the idea that people end up in such a situation that they can't really live outside of the institution in which they have been based, be it a hospital, be it an orphanage, be it a prison. And that's a really negative thing for children to have, to literally be unable to cope with the rest of the world, to deal with things beyond there. So we have this institutionalized, being unable to live outside the institution that you're a part of, and institutionalization, which is the process of becoming unable to live outside of the place which you're living in. So in this case, for those children, what we see is that happening, okay? In the England Romanian adoption study and in the Bucharest study, we are looking at children in a very, very negative situation. So I need to give you a little bit of background. Okay, now this takes place in Romania, but it all kind of is a legacy at the end of the Second World War. End of the Second World War, basically up to kind of the middle half of Germany, we have the Russians coming in from one side and the Americans and the other allies coming in from the other, and we have two very different worldviews. They're allies at the moment, but they have fundamentally different views on how the world should be. The one thing they kind of agree on is it's not fascism. And so, basically, the communists take from East Germany back to Russia to be their home, to be their area in which they have a sphere of influence. From West Germany onwards, we have the individualist, capitalist occurring there. So, one of those countries that became communist was Romania. Now, Romania came under the rule of a group of people, and then eventually under the rule of one man who was called Ceausescu. Okay, Nicolae Ceausescu. Now, he had a very strong desire to expand and to push communism further and to expand that, and he realised that in order to do that you need a big army, and you need a big army that's not loyal to individuals but loyal to the state. And so he basically created a situation which unfortunately was incredibly negative in the country because of bad management effectively, and people were starving, people living in very poor situations. And part of that was due to the fact that he had a policy where women should have multiple children, but that then those children should be raised in an orphanage run by the state so that they would become loyal to the state. It would truly be the motherland, yeah, the state that raised them. But things didn't go well. Things didn't go to plan. And what we ended up having is women being required to have as many children as they could, with an inability to actually properly care for and look after these children. And with the fall of communism, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, we see that actually the situation in a lot of former Soviet bloc countries, a lot of countries that were communist but now are no longer, we see some horrific conditions. And that is the context for what we're looking at today. Okay, we're looking at the English and Romanian adoption study by Rutter and Co, or et al. We use one. And that is basically the situation that he finds when he takes his team into Romania. And I heard that the situation was pretty rough, pretty bad in Romania. Now what I like to do is I like to click on this video. I'll also put the link into the video there, and you can watch that. You can see the effect of institutionalization. You see the rocking children, but you also see that malnourished arms. Yeah, look at my arms, you look at the shape of that. Compare that with the arms of the children which we see in the video. It's because they don't use their arms, they haven't lifted it. Okay, it is a bit distressing, so please bear that in mind if you're feeling a bit more sensitive at the moment. You may not wish to watch that particular one, but this one is a ITV news report done in, I think, 2005, which basically, it was supposed to have changed and got better since the 1990s there. But actually, the news report kind of indicates that it hasn't really got better in that time. It was done because Romania at that time was joining the European Union. There's a bit of worry around that. However, what you'll see from the video is the situation which children were coming from. And that's what we need to understand. The level of deprivation, the level of difficulty that they are experiencing when they were being brought in. Okay? Okay, so hopefully you've watched that and you've kind of realised that's not an easy thing to recognise and do that. Okay, what I wanted to do then is I wanted to go through the ERA study. Okay, now basically what we find is that by spending time with these children, we see the children who are adopted taken over to England and given that support that otherwise wouldn't have been available to them, that actually they start making some quite good progress. Kind of counter to what Bobby was saying, they do make progress. They are not with their peers, they're not equal to their peers for many, many, many years. And we see their IQ being much lower compared to their peers than their than their peers would expect to have at that stage. But what we see also is they do over time make improvements. Now, I'm saying you something slightly different with this one. You need to know that the standard aims, methods, procedure, findings for this study. This is an important study there. But I also want you to kind of understand the context and understand what things are happening and how the child is progressing over time, because this is a longitudinal study. Longitudinal studies don't often happen, and we come across it a few times in our studies, but this is a great one to try and map out the development of those children over time. So what I like to do is I like to use the Bucharest study, I'd like you to use the ERA study, I'd like you to use any of the other studies which you find, because you can also add to this, I want you to create a timeline from when Ceausescu's regime falls, going forward, for how these children develop over time. Okay, I'll also go on and try and find for you the All in the Mind radio program, which has Michael Rutter speaking to the presenter, and also some of the children who were originally part of the study speaking. One of them's going to university. At the time, I think it was a couple of years ago, and they're about 21, so they're probably about 25, 26 now. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a final follow-up on them done and released soon. That would be quite interesting. Okay, so can you please go through and do that now? So we're looking for a timeline of this. Okay. Okay, so I also just want to point out to you the Bucharest Early Intervention Study. Now, they did, again, a field experiment, but instead of doing the longitudinal one, they kind of looked at the more short-term elements. Okay, so with the strange situation procedure and other self-report methods, they assessed 95 children aged from 12 to 31 who'd spent time in orphanages. 50 non-institutionalised children were used to control. Now, that's important, okay? A control group gives us a point to compare as normal, okay? And we can see how far from the normal experience, they are, okay? And see how far off they are from the majority of children who are their peers. And that's really, really beneficial. So what I'd like to do is find out what the findings were and what the conclusions were. And remember, the findings and conclusions are different. Okay? Findings are the key points that they notice, observe, and bring in. The conclusions are the theories and ideas they come up with based upon the findings. So please go through and do that now. Okay, yeah, so hopefully you guys picked up that 74% of the control group came out secure compared to only 19% of the institutionalized group. So 65 of them came up with that additional form, that additional type, which Ainsworth failed to pick up, and yet Maitland and Solomon did, which is the 65% doing the disorganized attachment. Okay, so disorganized attachment is where, simply put, they don't know what's going to happen next time. Are they going to meet their needs or are they not? They can't rely on their caregiver. So we see that there. And then finally, 44% of them showed a disinhibited attachment, which basically is the I will go to anyone at all because, simply put, I'm at risk of dying if I don't get fed, if I don't get cared for. At this point, the risk of going up to a stranger, of engaging with a strange adult, is worth it. That says quite a lot, really, isn't it? That they're in that bad a situation. So, of course, the conclusions could only be that there's significant negative impact from having spent time in institutional care of attachment levels. Okay. Now, Rutter's ERA study kind of paints a little bit more of a positive picture. It does show us that they can recover, whereas this Bucharest early intervention study kind of has that limited snapshot, and as such doesn't really show us that progression and how they get better later on, where the ERA study does. But one of the things we have to bear in mind is the ERA study is they were doing it as a natural experiment and following things that are happening. And psychologists and specialists were working with these children to try and help them as much as possible. And so they did have additional specialist support to try and help them catch up as much as possible. So unfortunately for us, that means it's an extraneous variable, which means there's other factors which might be affecting how well they develop. Ethically, it would be unacceptable to say, oh no, you can't interfere, let's just make them suffer, let's just see how they go. As psychologists, we have to try and support and help, even when sometimes, ethically, it would be a bit of a dodgy one, but experimentally it would give us better results. Ethics come first. Evaluation, okay. 3 points I want to point out here. They are real life, okay. These are not made up. They're not contrived as other experiments are later on. So we've got that really strong point. Issues of extraneous variables, however, in field experiments, just as I was saying, i.e., of course the psychologists try to help. Yeah? What sort of people wouldn't? But in doing so, they are introducing extraneous variables. Plus also, we don't know what the level of neglect and impact had been on them prior to that. one of the sad facts is that in our society nowadays, children who are in foster care and who have ended up maybe in a group home are more likely to have either psychological, emotional or physical needs which are problematic to deal with. And unfortunately it does mean that, yeah, those children spend more time in care, and it might also be a factor affecting why they did so badly when we look at the Bucharest study, when we look at the ERA study. Finally, Romanian orphanages are not typical. Thank God. I hope and suspect that in Romania they're not the same anymore. Even in the UK, we see that there's been progress, there's been changes. Things aren't perfect, but they're not as horrific as they were. But that also means that, should we really be looking at this? Should we maybe just focus upon the normal experience? But that's kind of not what we do in psychology. We tend to focus on the abnormal because we think that looking at the abnormal helps us understand the normal. We can see how it breaks, then we can see how it works when it's not broken. So criticism is it really valid to try and apply so children's experience of being such extreme experience to children who never suffer such degradation? Remember, peel it out, guys. Why should you bother to peel your evaluation points? Because when you get into exam, A, it'll be in your head in that format, and that will help you do well. B, when you freak out and when you're stressed, if you fall back on your standard method, it will be ingrained and you'll smash it. Every year, examiner points out evaluation is not as strong as they want it to be. This is tried, this is tested, this is a fantastic method to use. So get on board, guys. If you don't want to peel it, well, there are other ways. You can check out Tutor to You. They can give you some advice there about how they do it. But I find that's a more complicated and convoluted structure. Okay? So initially, at this stage of education, I would recommend you go this way. But there are other resources and there are other places who do it slightly differently, which if you're not getting on with the peel structure, why don't you check out the grenade structure on Tutor to You. Finally, look back at your ethics guideline. Okay, ethical guidelines are really important. I want you to now consider whether you feel that this research was truly ethical or not. Okay, so one of the things that hopefully you kind of picked up was the fact that they didn't cause this to happen. And they're just taking advantage of it. They're taking advantage of the situation and also providing feedback and help. So ethically, it kind of links in with giving advice, which they did do. They also didn't cause any harm. Okay, and it's kind of that situation where it's okay to take advantage of a situation that's naturally occurring, but it's not okay to create a harmful situation. So when it comes to repeating the research, it's very difficult to do unless we have a situation where we find similar conditions. But hopefully we'll never be able to do that. So although we won't have integrated reliability to quite the same level that we wish, hopefully children won't suffer. Which, let's face it, that's more important. Okay, finally, what are the effects of institutionalisation? Just want to make that really clear. Okay, coming out of this, what we're seeing again and again happening, we've got disinhibited attachment. So that's when children, simply put, are just trying to find anyone who'll care for them. They are indiscriminate about who they attach to, who they show their signs of attachment to. Because simply put, if they can get anyone to care for them, then that's a win. We see that so frequent friendly to caregiver, as they are to strangers, indiscriminate is a highly unusual behaviour, but happens a lot in there. So Rutter showed that this is explained that this occurs as the child is frequently being cared for by many caregivers, but not given the chance to form a secure attachment at any point. Lower levels of intelligence are also there. Now this might be the case that the child was less intelligent, so they have gone on to develop less poorly, but we don't generally think that. We tend to think intelligence is a mixture of genetics and environment. And that environment is really important, okay? We think about it, a mother or a father will spend a lot of time talking to, playing with, engaging the child. And while it might seem like small things, it's about building blocks. It's about building that education, understanding. And if you start doing it early on, it really helps. But if you are deprived of that early on, that can really hold you back. Think about it. A child goes to school and doesn't know how to sit quietly. A child goes to school and doesn't know how to stop, look, and listen. And all of a sudden that child is on a back foot. They have to learn this or be cast as the naughty child. And unfortunately, labels stick. And we know when we look at labelling theory later on, it can be self-fulfilling prophecies, which end up leading to a really bad situation. So that's an issue there. Lower level intelligence. It might be because they don't get the stimulation, or it might be because the attachment is just lacking. But it could just, all we're saying is it is a recognised element. Okay? Now this has led to guidelines for orphanage, and there are lots of them out there. You can check out the Ofsted criteria for institutions in providing care. We see it for nurseries, we see it for daycare, we see it for all those sort of things. We have these things in order to try and help and support and prevent institutionalisation from happening to children. And we're more fond now of putting children to foster care than actually having orphanages or now what they sometimes are called group homes. Long gone are the days of the institution where we had 200 to 300 children who were kept there. Orphanages are no longer what they were, and we've changed our care system massively. It's not perfect, and sometimes things do slip through. But the research from the likes of Michael Rutter, and the ERA study, the Bucharest study, and the Goldfarb, has shown us that actually, yeah, we needed the change. I'm glad to say things have changed. Things have got better. Okay, thank you very much. That's the end of this lesson.